Hey, have you ever imagined being in the middle of the night, alone, and hearing something squeaking from a place where there should be nothing? Get ready, because today I'm going to tell you the craziest story of my life, something that turned my fear into courage and saved a life. I was just a truck driver, but what happened on that dark road changed everything. You'll feel the chills, the surprise, and the relief with me. Come with me on this spine-chilling journey. Look, before we dive headfirst into this madness, I need you to help me out real quick, okay? Check if you've already pressed the subscribe button here on the channel because, man, the next videos coming are a series that will leave you speechless. You won't want to miss a single second of this story. Have you signed up yet? Awesome. So, let's get started. Because what I'm going to tell you now is the kind of thing you only see in movies. Once upon a time, on a random highway in America, I was there, doing what I've always done for the past 22 years, driving my truck. Oh, my friend, you have no idea how much I've carried in my life. I've carried everything from live chickens, the kind that go poop all the time and leave a peculiar smell in the cab, to loads so dangerous that it gave me butterflies just thinking about it. There was one time I even transported a bunch of money to a bank. You know, the kind of money you only see in movies. Spending more than 20 years on the road is like having a VIP ticket to the show of life, seeing things that most people don't even dream exist. It's as if every kilometer driven was a page turned in a giant adventure book. I've faced blizzards that left the road as white as sugar, storms so strong it seemed like the sky was going to fall, and the sun blazing in the desert that made the asphalt melt. I saw the sunrise painting the mountains orange and the sunset transforming the sky into a canvas of incredible colors. Every city, every stop, every person I met was a different story. It was real life happening right in front of me, and I was part of it. I considered myself a veteran, someone who had seen it all and more. Nothing scared me, nothing took me by surprise, at least that's what I thought. I was the tough guy on the road, the experienced driver, the king of the asphalt. My trucker's intuition, you know, the one we develop after years and years of driving, never failed me. It warned me when a curve was dangerous, when the car in front was going to mess up, or when the weather was going to change. It was like a sixth sense for the road, my greatest guide. But even with all this experience, all this baggage of stories and dangers overcome nothing, and I repeat, nothing could have prepared me for what I discovered that day. What I loaded into the back of my truck that day wasn't chicken, or money, or dangerous cargo. It was something much more terrifying. Something that made me question everything I thought I knew about life and the roads of America. It was something that came from a place you least expected, a place that was supposed to mean the end of everything. And the most bizarre thing of all, it was inside a simple coffin. It may sound crazy, right, a coffin, but trust me, this story is more real than anything you've ever heard. It's the kind of thing that makes your skin crawl from head to toe and makes you think twice before going out there. What I saw, or rather, what I felt, inside that coffin was something that changed my life forever. And yours, perhaps, after you hear it all. So, brace yourself, because what comes next is something I never, in all my years on the road, imagined would ever happen. I was about to discover that sometimes the greatest danger lies not in the sharp turn or the explosive charge, but in the silence of an object that, by nature, should be at peace. And it was in this very scenario, on a dark and rainy night, in the middle of nowhere, that my most terrifying adventure began. We had just embarked on this trip, and look, the night was like the one you see in a horror movie. You know, it was like 2 in the morning, and we were in the middle of a mountain road here in the United States, the kind that has curves that look like a screw, and a bunch of trees on both sides that make everything too dark. To make matters worse, every fine rain, but it made the asphalt all wet and reflected the headlights of my truck in a kind of ghostly way. It was as if the road was inviting me to a mystery. And me, poor thing, alone in the ride, that part of the truck where the driver is, you know, driving really slowly, because the visibility was terrible. It was like trying to see through a gray veil. My radio, or the radio, it was completely out of area, just making that annoying hissing noise, like a television with no signal in the middle of the night. There was no other truck, no car, no living soul in sight. It was just me, my big 18-wheeler, the rain and the strange silence of the night. You know that feeling of being completely alone in the world? That's exactly how I felt. Every sound of the rain on the windshield, every little noise of the engine seemed amplified, as if it were telling me a secret. And it was right at that moment, when I was immersed in that silence broken only by the hissing of the radio and the sound of the rain, that the strangest things started to happen. I started to hear strange noise coming from the back, from the truck's trunk. You know, that part where the cargo is. At first I thought, there must be something loose in there. Old trucks always have some parts that insist on shaking. We who are truck drivers know how it is. The truck shakes a lot on the road, and sometimes a hinge, a latch the trunk door keeps banging and making an annoying little noise. It's completely normal. It's just another one of those annoying truck vibrations, I thought, trying to calm myself down. But deep down something was already telling me that this time it wasn't normal. I knew the sound of my truck like the back of my hand. I could tell the difference between a flat tire, a sputtering engine, or a loose part, and that noise. Oh, that noise was different. It was a sound that didn't belong there, and with every kilometer I went, it became clearer, more persistent, and more chilling. It was as if, in the middle of that immense darkness, something was desperately trying to tell me that I wasn't as alone as I thought. And it was from that moment on that my trip turned into a real nightmare. One that made me doubt everything I thought I knew about the roads and the mysteries of the night. Brace yourself, because what happened next was even more bizarre and disturbing than you can imagine. I was already thinking it was just going to be another annoying truck noise, like when you leave something loose in the glove compartment and it keeps banging around. At first, I even tried to convince myself that it was just that some part of the trunk, maybe Rheingold or a loose latch, was making a strange sound. After all, my truck had already driven more miles than most cars in America, and old roads always have their own groans and creaks. It's normal. We who are truck drivers get used to these sounds. They become part of our routine. It's like our background music on the road. I even joke that my truck has a life of its own. It makes so much noise, but no matter how hard I tried, something in my head wouldn't let me believe that it was just a normal thing. You know that feeling when the hair on your arm stands up, chills out of nowhere for no reason? That's exactly what happened. The noiseo. He wasn't what I expected. He didn't have a standard of normal beat. It wasn't that single quotes tech like a piece of furniture. It was different. It was like someone was knocking in a specific way, really wanting to get your attention. Think about it like this. It wasn't just any old knock, like when you knock on the door without thinking. It was like when you want someone to really listen to you, so you knock 3 times, stop, and knock again. Exactly like that. It was 3 strong beats, then a silence that seemed to last forever, and then 3 more beats. And this pattern repeated itself over and over in the darkness of the road. It was a sound that couldn't possibly be metal hitting metal or wood creaking. No, it was ... intentional. It was like someone was telling me, hey, I'm here, listen to me. My heart, it started beating faster in my chest. It felt like it was going to jump out of my mouth. My hands got sweaty on the steering wheel, even with the early morning cold. I tried to take deep breaths, but the air felt heavy, icy. We, who were tough on the road, learned not to be afraid of almost anything but that noise. It was making my hair stand on end. My head started to spin. Could it be an animal? An animal that got into the trunk, I thought. But an animal wouldn't knock like that. So surely, what if it was a person? Then the thought froze my spine completely. Who would be inside a coffin, in my truck, knocking like that? And why would I be carrying something like that? It was like a scary puzzle that I didn't want to put together. Each knock made me more nervous, more worried. It was a mixture of fear and a terrible curiosity that pulled me to find out what was happening. I knew I had to stop the truck. I couldn't ignore it anymore. My intuition, which never fails me, was screaming now. And I, the old wolf of the road, the driver who had seen it all, was about to face the biggest mystery of my life. A mystery that came from a place that should have been completely silent. And it was exactly at that point, with the knocks becoming more and more insistent and the fear growing in my chest, that I made a decision that would change everything. I could no longer drive as if nothing was happening. I had to stop, and that's what I did. So I stopped the truck. With sweaty palms and a pounding heart, I knew I couldn't ignore the pounding anymore. The adrenaline started to kick in, pumping my veins, and I felt a shiver down my spine. It was as if my intuition, that old friend who had always guided me on the roads of America, was screaming, "There is something very, very wrong here. Driver, you need to see what it is." I grabbed my flashlight, the big, powerful one that every trucker has, and crowbar, a tool we use for everything. From opening stubborn boxes to what was about to happen. I stepped out of the cab and the cold dawn wind hit me, mixed with the light rain that wouldn't stop. The wet asphalt shone under the headlights, and the trees around me looked like giant shadows, dancing in the wind. It was a scene that would be right out of a horror movie, I swear. With each step I took toward the back of my truck, my heart felt like it was going to jump out of my mouth. I could smell the wet earth and a mix of fear and curiosity. It was a strange feeling, like I was about to discover a secret that shouldn't be revealed. I got close to the trunk door, that large part where we load things. The darkness was almost total, broken only by the weak light of my flashlight, and it was at that moment, when I was just a few steps away from discovering the mystery, that I heard it. It wasn't knocking anymore. No, this time, it was a weak moan, very softly, almost like a whisper, but it wasn't the groaning of an animal. It wasn't the noise of metal. It was ... It was a human moan. A muffled sound of despair, coming from inside the trunk, behind those metal doors. "Oh my God," I muttered, feeling a chill so strong it felt like ice running down my spine. It was like someone had just flipped a fear switch inside me. That groan left no doubt. I wasn't carrying a corpse, as I thought. Or, if it was, that dead man had just been resurrected. And the knocking ... They started again. But now, it was no longer the 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks. No, it was much more fast, more desperate, as if the person inside was using all his strengths to warn me. They were continuous, urgent, a sound of help, please, that echoed in the silence of the night. The rearview mirror of my truck, the one we use to see what's behind us, was vibrating so much that it was difficult to see anything. The entire truck seemed to shake with the force of those blows. It was as if my big guy, my road partner, was alive and feeling the desperation of whoever was inside him. I couldn't wait any longer. There was no time to think. I stepped on the accelerator, ignoring the heavy rain and the slippery road. I had to get to the next abandoned post as soon as possible. I needed to open that trunk. I needed to find out what or who was inside. My heart was beating like a rock and roll drum, and the only thing I could think about was getting there quickly. That groan, those beats, everything was calling me. And I, the trucker who had seen it all, was about to see something that would change my life forever. And it was on that path, with fear and urgency pushing me, that I felt that my mission had just changed. It was no longer just about delivering a load. It was about saving a life. And for that I needed a safe place to stop and act. My head was going 1,000 miles an hour, and I felt the adrenaline running through every part of the body like a river of energy that wouldn't stop. That feeling of fear that had been squeezing my chest before hadn't completely gone away, but now something stronger had taken its place. It was a determination giant, like when you know you have to do something, no matter what, because someone's life depends on you. It was like my body knew what needed to be done, even though my mind was still trying to make sense of it all. I stepped on the gas, and those 5 miles to the abandoned gas station, which I would normally do quickly, seemed like an eternal journey. Every second was a movie playing in my head. I saw the person's face inside, imagined the panic, and that only gave me more strength to carry on. Beats back there. From the trunk, they didn't stop. On the contrary, they got even more strong, more desperate. It was as if the person felt that help was coming, and was using his last strength to guide me. The whole truck shook with the force of those muffled punches. It was a sound that stuck in my mind, and I knew I would never forget it. Finally, with a brake that made the truck shake a little, I arrived. The gas station was there, in the middle of nowhere, with the rain falling heavily and darkness surrounding everything. It was the perfect place for what I needed to do. Without wasting a second, I pulled the handbrake and jumped out of the cab. The rain immediately soaked me, but I didn't even feel it. My hands were already holding my crowbar, that super useful tool that I always carry with me, It was heavy, but at that moment, it seemed light as a feather. The trunk of the truck seemed bigger and scarier than ever, with that banging sound coming from inside. It was like a monster that kept a secret. I ran to the back, through the pouring rain, and the cold metal of the trunk hit my face as I approached. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to focus on one thing: the sound coming from inside, and that's when I heard it, a weak moan, so weak that it almost disappeared in the noise of the rain, but which was, without a doubt, a human of despair. "My God," I muttered, pulling back a little and looking at the big heavy padlock who kept the chest locked. There was no longer any doubt. There was someone alive in there, someone who needed help, and needed now. My heart felt like it wanted to burst out of my chest. It was like I was in a movie, but it was all real. I positioned the tip of the crowbar on the padlock's ring, took a deep breath and pushed with all the energy I had. The first attempt, nothing. The padlock didn't even move. It was like I was glued there forever, but I couldn't give up. Not now. That moaning, those desperate knocks, everything told me that I was that person's only hope. And with the image of her trapped and scared in my mind, I knew that the next attempt had to be successful. It was the only chance. I had to open this, no matter the cost. With my heart beating faster than a truck engine going uphill, I couldn't fail. Remember the padlock, that big, stubborn one that seemed to be stuck to the trunk. Well, my first attempt had been a disaster, but I wasn't going to give up. I knew that someone's life depended on me, and that gave me a strength I didn't even know I had. It was as if I had suddenly become a superhero from a movie, but without a cape, just with my truck and my crowbar. I positioned the crowbar again on the padlock ring, took a deep breath, held it in my lungs and pressed harder. A lot of strength. This time it wasn't just a snap, it was a noise. The metal snapped, the padlock ring twisted, and with a loud creak and a bang that echoed in the rainy night, it opened. I couldn't believe it. It opened. It was like a giant weight had been lifted off my shoulders. But the truth is that the greatest weight was yet to come. The chest was unlocked, but I still needed to open the coffin that was inside. I know you must be there, with your heart in your hand, thinking, what is this guy going to do? And look, I didn't even know, but tell me one thing. Have you ever heard a story like that, crazy like that? Did you know that something like that could actually happen on the roads of America? Or, I don't know, do you know anyone who has been through something unbelievable? Put everything in the comments below. I really want to know what you think and, who knows, maybe even help you with any questions. I'll be there in the comments waiting for you. My heart kept beating loudly, loudly, loudly. That feeling of relief and fear mixed inside me. Now, the next part of the mystery was about to be revealed. Slowly, with the flashlight shaking a little in my hand, I opened the trunk door. Inside, it was dark, almost like a black hole. But the light from my flashlight cut through the darkness and revealed what I had feared and expected. There it was, a funeral coffin. Large, dark, heavy, exactly what I had carried hours before. My hands were sweaty, and the cold of the rain seemed to have turned to ice inside my belly. I could hear the faint beating coming from inside the coffin. It was like a heart beating quickly, asking to be let out. I approached, my breath catching in my throat. The beating was there, so real that I could almost feel the vibration of the coffin, and a different fear took hold of me. What if it wasn't a person? What if it was something ... supernatural? Strange things happen on the road, but I couldn't turn back. It was now or never. I put my hands on the lid of the coffin. It was heavy wood, dark and cold. I forced the lid, but it was stuck. It seemed like it wouldn't budge, as if it held a very, very important secret. I pushed harder. With a frightening creak of old wood, the lid began to give way, and when it finally moved enough for me to peek inside, what I saw made me freeze. My blood ran cold in my veins. It wasn't what I expected. And at the same time, it was exactly what the knocking and groaning were telling me. Inside, there wasn't a corpse, there was a person, alive, and that person wasn't lying peacefully. She was sitting there, tied up in a terrible way, her eyes wide open, looking at me with a mixture of fear and a hope that ached in my chest. It was as if she was saying without words, "Help me, please." Her hair was stuck to her sweaty forehead, her face red from trying to free itself. It was a scene that I will never ever be able to get out of my head. And it was at that exact moment that the story I was living became more bizarre and real than anything I had ever seen in all my years on the road. I was no longer a simple truck driver. I was the guy who had just opened a coffin in the middle of the night and found a secret that shouldn't exist, and what would I do now? That was the question that echoed in my mind as I looked at that desperate face inside the coffin. I thought, Jesus Christ. That scream came from inside me. I could barely hold myself together. I almost fell backwards from so much shock and fright, but then my head clicked and I approached her slowly, still half in disbelief at what my eyes were seeing. It was as if my experience on the road, with everything I had already faced, was useless at that moment. It was something completely new, a nightmare becoming real right in front of me. She tried to speak, but it was impossible. When you try to talk with your mouth full of toothpaste, it was more or less like that, but much worse. The tape on her mouth wouldn't let anything out, just very low, desperate sounds. She sounded like a wounded little animal trying to call for help, and then I saw the tears. They were running from the corners of her eyes, mixing with the sweat on her face, which was red from all the effort she had put into trying to free herself. It was a heartbreaking scene. She was so scared, so desperate, that you could feel her pain. I looked at her and tried to keep my voice as steady as possible, even with my heart beating like a drum. "Calm down, I'll help you," I said. That was all I could say. Right, my hands were shaking a little, but I had to be strong for her. There was no time to waste. I took my knife. Every trucker has a good multi-purpose knife for cutting rope, opening boxes, that kind of thing, and started cutting the tape that held her hands and feet together. The tape was really thick, the kind we used to wrap heavy things, Took a while, but finally her hands were free, and then her feet. A weight was lifted off my shoulders, but only a little. She, Gabriella was her name, settled herself in the coffin, taking a deep breath, as if she were catching her breath for the first time in a long time. She coughed a little and finally, in a very weak and hoarse voice, she asked me, almost whispering, why were they taking me to the cemetery? That question, man, that question sent chills down my spine again. I had already imagined the answer, but hearing it from her, in that frightened voice, was different. It was like a horror movie turning into something much darker and more real. She looked into my eyes and I saw the terror reflected there. It was pure panic, and she said, her voice breaking, almost disappearing into thin air, to bury me alive. I heard them saying it. It was a warning to my father. Man, a chill ran through my body from head to toe. Burying her alive. Me. I was almost part of that. If I hadn't stopped the truck, if I hadn't heard the knocking, if I hadn't had the courage to open that coffin, I would have been an accomplice to a horrible murder. That was the word. Horrible. A crime that we only see in movies, and I was there, right in the middle of it. The idea of having been tricked into being part of something so cruel turned my stomach. I could have given her up for death without knowing it. That feeling is terrible. I needed to know who her father was. Who was behind all of this? Who was your father? I asked, trying to put the pieces of that macabre puzzle together. My mind was racing, trying to understand why someone would do something like that. She told me his name, Ottavio Muniz, a name that, to me, meant nothing at the time, but that I would soon discover was very important. I knew we couldn't stay there, in the middle of that dark, rainy road. Visibility was terrible. The rain formed an almost impenetrable curtain. We needed to get out of there, and fast. And it was this decision not to stay there that led us to the next part of this madness, a place where real help could finally arrive. I knew we couldn't waste another second there. The rain was falling so hard, and the darkness seemed to embrace us. It was as if the road that had once been my friend was now turning into a dangerous place. Visibility was terrible, and I could barely see a meter ahead, but it didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was getting Gabriella out of there as quickly as possible. She looked at the open coffin in the chest, which had been the temporary tomb, and asked me in a weak voice, "What are you going to do with the coffin?" You know, at that moment, the coffin was the last thing on my mind. It was worthless. It was just a piece of wood that had almost taken a life. I looked at her, who was still shaking a little, but already seemed a little calmer. "For being free, never mind," I replied, without thinking twice. "It doesn't matter now. The important thing is to get you to a safe place, and that's what I did." I closed the trunk door, but I didn't even try to lock it. The padlock was broken, remember? And honestly, I didn't care. The only thing that mattered was Gabriella. I ran back to the cab of my truck, and Gabriella followed right behind. She was still a little pale and shaking a little, but I could tell she was a little calmer now, a little safer by my side. "Hold on tight," I warned, and put the car in gear. We needed to get to a place where there was light, people, and, most importantly, real help. And the safest place I could think of was a hospital. On the way, as the truck cut through the darkness and rain of the highway, I glanced over at her. She was quiet, staring out the window, and I could tell she had a lot going on in her head. "Do you want to talk? Tell me what happened," I asked. "Sometimes it helps to talk, you know." She hesitated for a moment, her fingers tightening on the hem of the jacket I'd lent her. I knew it was hard, but something told me she needed to get it off her chest. And that's when she started, her voice low, barely above a whisper, but each word was like a punch to the gut. "I was leaving college," she began. "It was night, around 10 o'clock. The parking lot was almost empty. I listened to every word, listening to everything while keeping my eyes fixed on the road. I walked to my car, and as I was about to open the door, I felt someone grab me from behind. My heart skipped a beat. I could imagine the scene, the fear, the despair. Before I could scream, they put a cloth over my face. I think it was chloroformed or something." I nodded, understanding. It was the classic method, the kind of thing you only see in movies, but she had actually experienced. She went on, and every detail shocked me more. It was a terrible story, full of fear and despair that I couldn't have imagined if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes. She told me about being tied up, gagged, and placed in that coffin. It was like she was reliving it all over again, and I could feel her pain in every word. "Thank God you didn't give up," I said, "because man, the strength of that girl was impressive. A lot of people would have panicked completely, would have given up." She gave me a sad smile, almost a sigh. I almost gave up several times, but then I thought about my family, about my father, and I kept trying. I looked at her with an admiration that I couldn't contain. What incredible courage, and I told her how I felt. When I started hearing the knocking, I thought I was going crazy, I confessed. After all, I thought I was transporting a dead body. But the sound of the tape, the beating, and then her voice. Oh, her voice. "That's when I first heard your voice," I said, "when you asked if there was anyone there at the abandoned gas station." And I said yes. It was like a miracle had happened. Someone had heard me. Someone knew I was there. And even if you couldn't open the casket, at least you would know that a living person was being buried. That connection, in that moment of panic, was what saved her. And that same connection would lead us to the hospital, where the truth behind it all would begin to unravel. For you, we're getting close to the end of this adventure, and you're already up to speed on almost everything. But wait, I realized something. You still haven't left your thumbs up on this video, have you? Auction. This is super important for YouTube to understand that you are enjoying the content and to continue showing you our coolest videos. It's like a signal to him, hey, more of this. And so we continue to help you with stories that will surprise you. It costs nothing, it's free, and it helps a lot. Have you left your like yet? Thanks a lot, from the bottom of my heart. Now, we can continue. You won't believe what happened after all this. Phew, never in my life did I think I would open a coffin and find a living person. You know, that image of her, with the wide eyes looking at me, with that despair on her face. I swear to you, I'll never forget it. It's like a photo stuck in my mind that appears every time I close my eyes. She even shivered a little when I said that, as if she felt the cold of that coffin again. It was a moment of relief and deep shock at the same time. It was hard to process all of that, but we had to keep going. And then we started to really talk. You know, I asked, why did he do all this? Why hire you, a complete stranger, for something like this? Why didn't he transport you himself? My head was full of questions, trying to understand the crazy puzzle we had just solved. She thought about it for a bit, and what she said made me understand everything, or almost everything. "I think he wanted an extra layer of protection," she began, her voice still a little hoarse, but firmer now. "If something went wrong, like it did, the police would waste their time investigating you while he got away. Makes sense, right? I'd be the scapegoat. the guy who had the evidence of the crime, while the real culprit disappeared off the map. It's a cruel plan, but a clever one, if you think about it. But there was more. She continued. And also, I think he wanted innocent witness, like me. Someone who saw the coffin being placed on the truck, who transported everything without knowing what was really inside, and who delivered it to the cemetery thinking it was just a normal corpse. Someone who could tell the story without knowing the truth, so that if they found out about it later, the authorities would think it was a normal funeral and not a cruel kidnapping. The guy was cold and calculating. He planned every detail to try to get away with it. This idea of using me, without me knowing, to be part of such a terrible crime, gave me butterflies in my stomach. He wanted me to be an accomplice without knowing it. How crazy. After all this, we needed a plan. I asked, what do you suggest? Then, hospital. She didn't think twice. I need medical attention anyway, she replied. And from there we can call my father, he'll know what to do. And I agreed immediately. It made perfect sense. First, her health. She was dehydrated, weak, and we had no idea what kind of drugs they had given her during the kidnapping. She needed to be seen by a doctor urgently. So that's what we did. I started following the signs to find the closest hospital to that small town in the middle of America. It was a small 2-story building with an emergency sign lit up at the entrance. It seemed like a cozy place where we would finally be safe. With each kilometer we got closer, the tension eased a little. But I knew the story wasn't over. The danger was still lurking, and we were about to enter a new chapter, where the police and Gabriella's father would take action. And this part, my friend, is as full of surprises as anything we've ever experienced. We were one step closer to unraveling the rest of the mystery, to understanding who Otavio Muniz was, and why someone hated him so much to the point of doing such a cruel thing to his daughter. And that's how we got to hospital from that little town, right in the middle of the United States. It was a small building, only 2 stories, but the sign emergency shined brightly at the entrance, like a beacon of hope in the darkness. It felt like we had finally arrived at the right place. We ran inside, and we could hardly believe that we were safe. Gabriella was weak, but alive, and that was all that mattered. Soon one doctor came to meet us, and when I started telling the story, my friend, the poor guy was shocked, open-mouthed. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. In 30 years of medicine, I've never heard anything like this, he muttered, as he examined Gabriella very carefully. He said he would need to do a lot of exams to see if she was dehydrated, if she had any injuries, or if there was anything strange on her body. It was important to know everything so she could get well again. While the doctor was taking care of Gabriella, I called their father, this Otavio Muniz guy. I knew he was an important guy, but I had no idea how important. He answered the phone, and I started telling him the story. Mr. Muniz, I said, your daughter has been found. She's here in the hospital, alive. And before I could finish, he interrupted me. His voice was strong, but I could feel the emotion. Don't say anything else over the phone, he said. We don't know who might be listening. I'll get a phone. Call helicopter right now and I'll be there in less than 2 hours. What's the name of the hospital? I gave him the information and he hung up quickly. But only after making me promise that I wouldn't leave Gabriella's side until he arrived. It was like mission given is mission accomplished. I went back to the exam room and the doctor was almost done. He assured me that Gabriella was weak but out of danger. And then we continued talking, and he asked me again how I found her. I started to explain, but he stopped me again. Suddenly, police arrived. 2 federal agents, the kind you see in movies, entered the room. They exchanged glances, and it was clear that the name Muniz had made an impact. Let's wait for him to arrive then, said one of the agents. In the meantime, let's take a look at this truck. I handed over the keys, and felt a huge weight lift off my shoulders. Now it was no longer just me and Gabriella against those criminals. We had the police. Her father was on his way, and soon the whole truth would come out. What I didn't know was that that night was far from over, and that the worst was yet to come. But at least the scariest part was about to end. Less than 10 minutes later, the door opened again and a tall man with gray hair and a wrinkled suit rushed in. It was Gabriella's father, Otavio Muniz's daughter, he exclaimed, running to hug her. It was a scene that made me hold back tears. Gabriella collapsed in her father's arms, sobbing like a child. He hugged her tightly, as if he never wanted to let go. We needed them to give their statements separately, so I waited outside with Otavio and one of his security guards, a big guy who looked like he had stepped out of an action movie. In the hallway, Otavio offered me a coffee from the machine. While we were drinking it, he started asking questions. Tell me everything, from the beginning. How did this Ricardo guy hire you? I explained, and when I said I was transporting a funeral casket, he interrupted me. He said, that tracking service the truck driver had asked about the cargo. He made me hang up the phone right away. This isn't the tracking service, he said. Seriously, it's someone trying to confirm that you still have the truck and the cargo. Ricardo and the other criminals must have been waiting at the cemetery. At that moment, the federal agents approached. They had intercepted the criminals' communications. They knew that Gabriella had been found. We have a team ready to intercept you, but you need to get out of here now, they said. I looked at the night sky, at Ottavio's helicopter, and at the police cars. The adrenaline was back. After all that, I went to a room and called my mother. She already knew. She had even left in the morning. National newspaper. My son, a national hero, she said, full of pride. I smiled. It's not that bad, Mom. I just did what I had to do. My father, who was also a truck driver, would be proud. The gang leader, Eduardo Tavares, a former manager my father had fired for theft, wanted revenge. That's why he did all this to Gabriela. The tension was high, but I knew we were safe. After all the chaos, I didn't feel like a hero. I just wanted to be the simple guy who did his job and went home. I turned down interviews, and Ottavio Muniz even hired a press officer to deal with the madness. But something had changed inside me. A while later, Ottavio invited me to lunch. He had a proposal. His company headquarters was a giant building. I felt a little out of place, but I was treated like a celebrity. I thought about it a lot, talked to my mother and sister. Son, you've been around a lot in this life. My mother said maybe it's time to stay closer to home, and I accepted. 2 months later, I started my new career at Muniz Logistics. I got a badge, a computer, a desk, and a bright room. It was different from the truck cabin, but I was learning. The image of Gabriela in the coffin is a trauma, an invisible scar, but I learned to live with it, to use it as motivation. Today, almost 3 years after that night, I still work at Muniz Logistica. My office is no longer the same. Now I am director of the security department, with a large, modern table. I use everything I learned on the road to protect other drivers. The road taught me patience, resilience, humility. But that freight taught me value of courage. The courage to follow my instincts, even when it was easier to ignore them. The courage to stop and check, even when everything seemed to tell me to keep going. I remember a friend who told me that he once felt that something was wrong with a load, but he kept going. Later he discovered that he was transporting people in a situation of slave labor. He carries that burden to this day. How many truck drivers out there ignore the signs? The road is not just asphalt, it is a path full of challenges and decisions. But if there is one thing I have learned from all this, it is that no matter how dark the night is, how heavy the rain is, how difficult the journey seems, it is always worth stopping and listening. It is always worth doing the right thing, even when no one is looking. Because, in the end, that stop on the road didn't just save Gabriela. It also saved a part of me that I didn't even know needed saving. And that's it, my friend. Thank you so much for watching this story until the end. I hope it made you think a little about the crazy things that happen in life and on the roads. And look, if you enjoyed this trip and don't want to miss the next ones, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. There's a lot of good stuff coming. See you in the next video.